Amen. Kids, you can go. How is everybody this week? So anybody get some time outside? It's a warm day, right? Beautiful day. Beautiful day. We are in week 3 of a series where we've been looking at the life of Nehemiah. So this Nehemiah is a guy from the Old Testament that God instilled a great deal of concern into about his homeland. And his homeland is a place that you're probably familiar with, a place called Jerusalem, a city that was up and down then, but it's still kind of up and down now. A lot of the political unrest that Jerusalem faced back then, they're still facing today. There are still people who are watching what's going on in Jerusalem on a regular basis and dialing it in according to what some of the things that the Bible says. It's an important city, and it's a city that was really important to Nehemiah because it's where his ancestors were from. In this series, we've already talked about how when we're concerned like Nehemiah was for this city, and we'll talk about a little bit later about why he was so concerned, but when we're concerned, we should bring that concern to God, understanding whether or not it's something we should be concerned about in the first place. And then when we realize that it is, then it should drive us to this place of confession and prayer. And it should lead us to a place where we're confident and convicted that God can and will help us through whatever our circumstances may be in that moment. So we've talked about that in this series. We've also talked about how when we're paying close enough attention to what God is doing, we get to see him do more. That God will show us when the right time to move is. We talked about that last week when we talked about striking while the iron is hot. Sometimes that means waiting. Always that means praying and going to God directly so that he can show us the right time to move. This week, what we're going to see in this story of Nehemiah from the second half of chapter 2, which is where we'll be, we're going to see Nehemiah enact this master plan. There really isn't so much of a plan other than an idea. He's headed a direction. He knows that there's this thing that he wants to accomplish, but he doesn't really know how he's going to do that yet. We're going to see some of that get formed today. And if you haven't been here for the rest of the series, I know that last week, if you were planning on watching online, we ended up losing the video. So that didn't get online if you were like, oh, I meant to go back and watch it. We lost it. So technical glitches that happen sometimes. But I will tell you too, this week we're doing something new and we're actually live streaming. So if for whatever reason you can't be here at 4 p.m. in the future, our plan is that you can log on. We'd much prefer you to be here with us. But if for some reason you can't, hopefully shortly after 4, after worship is finished, we'll be broadcasting the sermons online on our YouTube channel. So we're going live now, right? So anybody who's online can see us, and we are good. So that's some of the technological advancements that we're making. So it's not all bad when it comes to technology. So if you haven't been here, if you didn't catch last week or the week before, Nehemiah, this is what's happened so far. Nehemiah is an Israelite. His job is, anyone remember? Cupbearer, which means he tastes the food and the drink of the king to make sure that it isn't poisoned. It's a tough job. Either you're very good at it or you are very dead very quickly. And while he was working for the king, he learned that his homeland had been torn down. Now, Nehemiah was part of a group of people that's historically called the diaspora. And the diaspora is the group of exiled Jews. And so they were sent kind of all over. And specifically, Nehemiah was sent to the outer edge of Persia, a place we call Babylon. And he was sent there. He was enslaved, even though he had a really good job. Not all the Israelites had really great jobs. He had, well, if you can call testing for poison a good job. He had a cush job. He had a job that he was well taken care of in close proximity to the king. But the diaspora is a word that describes all of these people. So if you ever heard that word historically, Nehemiah was part of that. All of these people understood that their city wouldn't be in the condition that it was when they left it. And a lot of these people didn't leave it directly. They left it generations before, like 1, 2, 3 generations earlier, about 70 or 80 years. But just like had your grandparents told you about a city and that they lived in, and then you went to see it, it would probably look a lot different than how they described it to you if they showed you pictures, which Obviously, we didn't have photography at the time of Nehemiah, but if there were pictures that existed, you would probably have something in your mind, some mental picture that said, this is probably what it looked like. And so Nehemiah probably had that. But what he found is that it looked dramatically different than that. It looked way, way worse. So he went to the king and said, I've heard that this city's been torn down and this is the place where my ancestors are buried. And can you please let me go to address it? And the king ultimately says yes and lets Nehemiah head to his city. And that's where we pick up the story today. The story starts today with Nehemiah in Jerusalem for the first time, and he's taking a survey. And not like a survey that you hand out to people, but he's looking around, he's studying the land and trying to decide what are the problems and what are some of the solutions that we can come up with. So today as we read, we're going to read the last half of chapter 2. It's only 9 verses. We're going to read all of it. We'll come back and unpack some of it. But as we do, we're going to see Nehemiah do 5 things. And this is, if you haven't picked up on this already, this is an unbelievably practical book. And there are things that Nehemiah does chapter after chapter that we'll talk about week after week, where there are practical applications for those people who are interested in making practical changes to their lives. And so I'm hopeful that something out of the last couple of weeks, something out of today is something that resonates with you, and you can go, oh yeah, Nehemiah did this. Man, this is something that I should be doing too, especially if you're facing some sort of thing, some circumstance in your life that's concerning to you. So if we were to begin reading here in Nehemiah 2, verse 11, this is, if I can get my screen to cooperate with me here. It doesn't seem to be. So, can we just go to the first slide? Yeah, great. So it says this. I went to Jerusalem, and this is the words of Nehemiah. I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone what my God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. By night, I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate. Sounds like a beautiful place, right? Who wants to live in the dung gate? Like Felony Flats, dung gate? I don't know. We don't call it Felony Flats anymore. We call it Kendall Yards is what it is now. But yeah. By night I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pool. But there was not enough room for my mount to get through, so I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I'd gone or what I was doing, because as yet I'd said nothing to the Jews or the priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we'll no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. They replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. What is this you're doing? They asked. Are you rebelling against the king? I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it. So that's the whole story. But we see Nehemiah do the first of these 5 things, something that can be an encouragement to us in the very first verse of that, Nehemiah 2:11. It says, I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. This is the very first thing that he does when he gets to Jerusalem. So what does he do? He takes some time to get some rest. How many have ever traveled to a place where the time difference is dramatic? Like outside of the United States, okay? Yeah, like 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 hours. Like sometimes you go a place and then it's tomorrow or yesterday, like depending on the direction that you go. So a lot of us have been to those places. In 2017, when my youngest son graduated from high school, our graduation gift to him was that he got to pick any place on the globe. And we said, for your graduation gift, we're just going to go there. And I think we kind of expected him to just spin the globe and like put a finger somewhere. But that's not what he did. Of all the places in the entire world, 205 plus countries, he picked Chicago, Illinois, which was dumb for a couple of reasons. One, we love Chicago. We're a family that has been to Chicago a number of times. We're Chicago Bears fans. We've seen games. But we were going in June. So there's not a lot of NFL going on in June. Approximately this many games going on in June. And so we'd been to Chicago just a couple years before, too. And Becky and I were like, how do we kindly and lovingly nudge him toward somewhere other than Chicago? But thankfully, my oldest son did it. And in the kindest way possible, he said, why are you such an idiot? You could go anywhere, pick a better place outside of America. He's like, dude, we're both in French class together. We could go to Paris. And so we gave him a do-over. Ultimately, Ethan picked New Zealand. He loves The Lord of the Rings. A lot of the Lord of the Rings movies were filmed there. We were able to do a tour of the workshop where they had built some of the props. He wanted to be in special effects, and then later realized how difficult it is to get into that line of work. So now he works in prosthetics, which is kind of like special effects that actually helps people. Like he builds legs and arms, but not for movies, but for veterans and for people who need them. So it's kind of a cool full circle thing. But I can tell you, I don't think I've ever been as tired as when I got off the plane in New Zealand. I don't even remember what time we left or what time we landed, but I know that I thought it was nighttime, but it was actually just about to be morning, and it was completely dark. I don't think I slept on the plane at all, and so it was just really disorienting. It was confusing, and we had to go find a rental car counter, and then when they gave us the keys and we found the car, the steering wheel was on the wrong side of the car, and then the side we were supposed to drive on was on the wrong side also. And then leaving the airport on this highway, we had to go through this 6-lane highway speed roundabout at 100 kilometers per hour. And I'm like, I don't even know how fast that really is. And I just remember being so confused and disoriented by the whole thing. And even more so, not just because of the culture shock, but because we were all really, really tired. Because it was a long trip to get over there. It took a lot out of us. I remember we made it to our hotel and we had all these big plans for that first day in this different country, this different continent. And you know what we did that first day? We slept. I think we got out to get some brunch at some point. We walked around a little bit and we were like, let's call it a day. Let's go home and get a little bit more rest. And that's because rest is important. We all need to be people who value rest. Nehemiah's journey would have been a long one. From Babylon, from Persia, through Iraq and Iran. He would have crossed modern-day Iraq and Iran, all of those places, and then through into the inner kind of most point of Jerusalem, which borders Egypt. So he's almost from central Russia to Africa. It's a long way. Roughly 1,050 miles is what he would have had to have walked. So that's the equivalent of basically Spokane to Seattle and back twice. So imagine how long it would take you to walk from Spokane to Seattle and back 2 times. And keep in mind where they're at. This isn't the most temperate of climates. This isn't the best terrain to walk across. And remember, anyone remember what month was it last week when we talked about Nehemiah having a conversation with the king? Anyone remember? It was April. So if it took 4 months, what months is he traversing this desert of Iraq and Iran through? May, June, July, August, the hottest. So this trip was a substantial trip for Nehemiah. And that's why he did what he did. The smart thing, what my family should have done when we landed in New Zealand, when he got to Jerusalem, he rested. If you are facing something that's concerning in your life, if there's a situation that's concerning you, sometimes the fix is as simple as taking a nap. It really is. Have you seen all of the studies that are out there about sleep and the impact that it has on you, a lack of sleep? It can be a a cause or a complication, a major contributor to so many health problems. So let's follow Nehemiah's example. Let's get some rest. Let's take a nap. Not now, right? Like, I'm looking around, just double checking. My dad is normally the one who's sleeping through these things, so I don't have anything to throw at him right now. But if Nehemiah isn't enough to convince you that rest is important, how about Jesus? In Matthew 8:23, it says, "Then he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. Suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, 'Lord, save us, we're going to drown.' He replied, 'You have little faith. Why are you so afraid?' Then he got up, rebuked the winds and waves, and it was completely calm." And I imagine he went back to sleep. Rest is important. Jesus took naps. You should take naps. Nehemiah took naps. You should take naps. Plan to get some rest. So that's the first thing. Get some rest. After Nehemiah was well rested, this problem that was concerning him about the city walls, the temple, this whole place being torn down, he needed to take a good look around. That's the second thing. After you're well rested, take a look around. Survey the situation. Orient yourself to the reality of what you're facing before you get your hands dirty. Because if you just jump into something, you may be wasting your effort in a way that doesn't need to be wasted. So take some time. Find out what's real and what's not. I know that in my life, and I imagine in yours, there have been times where I've been so overwhelmed emotionally that I think what's in front of me is one way, but it's actually another. My emotions skew my perception of things sometimes. That's why it's important for us to be well rested, because that's less likely to happen when we're well rested. But it's also why it's important for us to stop and to take as objective of a look around as we possibly can. Survey the situation. Get your bearings about you so that you know what's real and what isn't. And that's what Nehemiah does. He goes through all the gates. He inspects the wall, and he learns what the problem really is. Somebody told him in the beginning, but now he got to go there and see for himself what really needs to be done. And when he did, he learned that things were a lot more dire than he originally thought. He couldn't even pass through certain places. But I do want to encourage you, that's not always the case. Sometimes we face some concerning thing. We look around and we go, oh my gosh, this is such a big, scary thing. But it's not always. It's not always. And if we have the right people around us, if we have the right community, if we have the right relationship with God, if we know where to go in the middle of those situations, then it doesn't really matter how scary those things are. Because our trust now, our faith is in the right place. And we believe through our conviction and our commitment to God, we believe that He's going to pull us through those things. So sometimes what seems like a really big thing, if we would just stop and take a breath, take an objective look around, be honest with ourselves about what's real and what isn't, what's true and what's false, sometimes we would learn that the situation in front of us just isn't as big of a deal as we thought that it was. Now, in Nehemiah's case, it was. And he looked around and he knew that there was serious work ahead, that the place was in even worse shape than he thought it would be. There was no wall, there was no road, there was nothing here. It was all rubble. But in order to know how to address the concern, he needed to look around. So we should be people who get rest. We should be people who look around. And we can learn from Nehemiah's next step too. Step 3 is this. Phone a friend. It's not just a lifeline on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. This is an important thing. The simple fact is sometimes it's a good idea for us to call in reinforcements. It's a good idea for us to reach out and tell people, I'm struggling with this thing. I'm concerned about this thing. And I took a nap and I looked around and I'm still a little scared. I'm overwhelmed by the amount of work that needs to be done in this place. So you pick up the phone and you call somebody. This is the point where Nehemiah realizes it's time to call somebody. In verse 16, It says, the officials did not know yet where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I'd said nothing to the Jews or the priests or nobles or officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and we will no longer be in disgrace. Nehemiah takes a look around and he understands that this is not something he's going to be able to do on his own. So he phones a friend. He begins to rally the troops. Let's rebuild. If we rebuild, we'll no longer be in disgrace. It's a motivational speech. It's moving people forward. It's unifying and it's inspirational. And that's a good thing. We want to be motivated. We want to be inspired. And when something inspires us, we want to be able to share that with other people. And I'm sure that the Israelites were encouraged by the things that he said. But I would also say, we've all heard people in powerful positions, people who are excellent speakers with grand ideas, people with silver tongues making inspirational appeals to the masses. And we've probably all experienced, at least once in our lives, that sometimes those inspirational things that people say end up not coming to fruition. That it's exciting and it's encouraging and it's motivating, and then a couple days later it's gone. You go, well, where did it go? I thought we were going there together. I thought we were moving this direction together. I have to imagine that the Israelites were probably a little apprehensive because they'd heard big, powerful people say motivational things before. And it would have been easy for them to go, yeah, I really want to go the direction that you're going, but I have reservations. I need a little more than words. I need a little more than promises. I need a little more than motivation. I need a little more than inspiration. I need a little more than encouragement. But Nehemiah was a man of great wisdom, which is why he takes this next step. Share your story. Nehemiah is willing to share his story. This is something that we should be doing a whole lot more than we do. When a situation's concerning us, especially when we're talking about a concerning situation where the concern is about somebody's relationship with God, about their faith. If the concerning situation you have is about your kids and they're not walking with the Lord in the way that you want them to walk in the Lord, and you're laboring in prayer for them, if that's the thing that's concerning you, or a friend or a family member or somebody who you just desperately want to see get close to Jesus, if we're trying to help those people especially understand who Jesus is and why it's important to live a life in pursuit of him and in pursuit of faith, we need to be willing to share our story with people. Because if we don't, how are they going to see anything other than empty words? Hey, you should do it. You should follow Jesus. Why? I don't know. Well, tell me what he's done in your life. I don't know. I go to church. That's not inspiring to people. Well, the worship's really great at my church. The pastor he's okay. And it's a good place to be, like it's nice. Okay, but what's happening in your life? What is God doing in your life that means that I should change my life completely around to start new patterns and new habits, to adhere to this system of rules and regulations, which we know, if we walk with Jesus, we know that's not what the Bible is, but that's how it appears sometimes. So how do we take people to that next portion? We have to share our story with people. We have to be willing to tell them what God has done and is doing for us personally. Because they don't know Jesus yet, but they know you. They don't trust Jesus yet, but they trust you. So if you would be willing to share your story, you're sharing Jesus' story too, if you're walking with Jesus. There's this word that we use in the church, a word called testimony. And it's a unique word because we don't use it in conversation that often, right? It's not a common word, testimony. We see it primarily in two arenas. One, religious arenas. Two, legal arenas. Legal testimony is when somebody in court under oath They'd make a sworn statement about something they saw or something they experienced. And those testimonies are powerful things in the court, in the legal system. They're so powerful that they can incriminate people, that they can indict people, that they can be used to convict people, or even to set people free. Testimony is powerful in a legal arena. Testimony is even more powerful in a religious context. Nehemiah is making this statement. He's inspiring people, but then he's saying, and look what God has already done, and how do you explain that I can go to a king that I'm a slave to, that my job is to taste food that might be poison? How do you explain that I can go to a king and a queen and I can find favor with them? In a way where they say, well, not only can you go, but you can have everything you asked for, plus take this army alongside of you so that they'll protect you. Take these timbers, take these bricks and these stones, and when you get there, you go with my endorsement, you go with my authority. So Nehemiah is already telling the people, this is my testimony. This can't be explained other than that God is involved, that divine intervention is a part of this whole thing. He was willing to ask audaciously, and not only did he live, but he got everything he asked for and more. It says in verse 18, I told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. They replied, well, let's start rebuilding. So they began this good work. Testimonies are powerful things. We need to be people who share our stories with others. Not just encouragement, not just inspiration, not just motivation. Those are fine things. But God should also be doing something in our lives and in our minds and in our hearts, and we should be sharing those things with those people as well. Because motivational thoughts are great, but when they actually see a change, that's a powerful, powerful thing. And that brings us to the final thing that we see Nehemiah do here. And this is an interesting one that we'll talk a little bit more about in a couple weeks. But it's this. Handle the haters. Handle the haters. Nehemiah is going to have the opportunity to do this again and again and again and again through all 13 chapters of this book. He has opposition the whole way. And that's a crazy thought to me, because you go, okay, well, Nehemiah is just doing what God told him to do, right? He's just doing what God told him to do. He's just doing what the king gave him permission to do, and what the army the king gave him is protecting him so that he can do, and what his friends are agreeing to do right alongside of him. So you might think that with all of this support in his life, opposition doesn't matter. It's just smooth sailing from this point on. But that's just not the reality of most situations, especially in pursuit of Christ. Because there are forces in this world that do not want you to pursue Christ. It's true. You're going to face opposition, just like Nehemiah did. You're going to face it regularly. So we have to be prepared for it. There are times where you're just going to be pursuing God in the way that you believe that he wants you to pursue him, and bam, you're faced with something unexpected. And you're going to find times where there are haters. And it can be very, very discouraging. But we have to be careful to not let it discourage us. Because the opinions of haters are not greater than the opinion of God, our Father, our Lord. And that's what we need to remember when we get into those places where we're discouraged, where we're rested and we're prayed up and we're confessed and all of these things. We're inviting other people and we're taking sober looks around and we're headed a direction. And then after all of those things, something happens, some little thorn at the end, and you go, now I'm discouraged. You have to learn. It's a muscle. It's muscle memory. It's development. You have to learn to say, no, these opinions do not matter as much as the opinion of the one who died to give me life. That's the most important opinion. So that's what Nehemiah does. And then I want to say something here, and I want to be careful about how I say it. I don't really want to be that careful about how I say it. As Christians, we are called to be kind. But sometimes kind isn't nice. And so there are some times when you're going to face some opposition, and you're going to go, I got to do something kind, but I'm still going to tell this person they're being a jerk. and you may be conflicted about that at some point, but I want to let you know that's what Nehemiah does. These people are making fun of Nehemiah, and Nehemiah doesn't go, guys, yeah, good one, yeah, that's funny, okay. We're called to be kind, but we're not necessarily called to be timid. Doesn't mean that we're supposed to be shrinking back all the time, just bending to the will of other people. We need to be people who are willing to stand up sometimes and do what Nehemiah does when he basically says to these people, look, you may be mocking me, but we are going to rise from ruin. This city is going to rise from ruin. This temple is going to rise from ruin. These walls are going to rise from ruin. Our worship is going to rise from ruin and rise from this place and reach our God. And when it does, remember that you have absolutely nothing to do with it. That's what Nehemiah says. That's what he says. Remember, you have no part in the success that we're about to experience. So have fun in the cheap seats. Have fun, John, from the sidelines while we're in the game. And have fun watching us win. This is a master class in how you handle the haters. Master class. Because what he does is he says, watch me. And then he does it. See, I know people who say, watch me, and then they never work. I'm like, I am watching. That's why I'm critical of you. I've been watching. And I'm working very hard. But he's saying, watch me. What better way is there for you to prove your haters wrong than to go do exactly what you said you were going to do, to the degree that you said you would do it, or more so? If you do that, guess what? They'll learn not to doubt you again. And if you're doing that in pursuit of Christ, they'll learn not to doubt him too. It's not from a place of pride. It's not from a place of arrogance. It's from a place of confidence where you say, I'm going to do what God told me to do. And if you're going to get in the way, I'm going to let you know you're in the way. God or myself are going to move you out of the way. And when you see where we're going, maybe you'll regret your decision along the way. That's what Nehemiah does here. So these are the 5 things that we saw Nehemiah do this week. Get some rest. Take a look around. Phone a friend. Share your story. Handle the haters. And as you look at this list, I'd say, whatever situation you're in the middle of in your life, if there's something, and I think that it's the case for everybody, even in the good times of life, there's something that concerns us. Maybe it's a smaller concern or a bigger concern at different times, but there's probably something that is concerning to you sometimes. Today. It's probably something that concerned you today. So if you think about that thing that's concerned you, I'd encourage you to ask yourself, am I rested? Do I need to set a new, healthier pattern of rest in my life? Do I need to get on some sort of sleep schedule? Do I need to set some sort of new goal about putting away my phone or the computer, getting off the internet a couple hours before bedtime? Do I need to start practicing the Sabbath? That's something that the more I've walked with God, the more I've valued. And when I implemented a day of the week that I just set aside to be fully devoted to whatever God puts in front of me that day, and to allow myself freedom from the burdens of work and answering my phone and emails and when I just get every Friday, like if you guys try to text me on Friday, if I text you back, it's because I want to. Not because if you text me on Monday, I text you back because I have to, right? That's my job. But on Friday, God's given me the permission to say no. That's my Sabbath. That's where I go, I might, because I really like that person. Or because I think I should in the moment. But I don't put pressure on myself to do that. That's one of the ways that we find rest in the world. We are not going to experience rest unless we plan for it. If you're so busy that you can't rest, you're going to stay busy until you plan not to be. It's just the practical truth of the whole thing. So take a look at your life. Take a look at your circumstance and say, am I getting the rest that I need to? And if you're not, plan to, or you won't. Have you taken a sober look at your surroundings? Are you certain that things are as bad as they seem? Or maybe they're not. Because maybe you have a partner, maybe a human partner, maybe a spiritual partner that you can go to with some of those things. Sometimes they are bad things, but we can't really know how bad they are unless we're willing to take a look around. And when we do, and we see that things are rough, are we willing to call in reinforcements? Are we willing to phone a friend? There are people in your life, there are people in this room who would be happy to pick up the phone if you're willing to call, even on Friday. I'm more quickly going to answer a text, just so you know, but I'm happy to help, whether you text or call. Maybe your situation is one where you're laboring for the sake of someone else, for their faith, where you're burdened for their eternity. Have you considered sharing your story with them? What you've seen Jesus do? I promise you, if you share your story, you will see God work in unfathomable ways. You will. Finally, do you have haters? Are you facing opposition? Are there people in your life that will they get in the way sometimes? They're a discouragement sometimes. Are you willing to bring them before God too and say, God, heal their heart. Take away the pain that I feel at their hands and heal their heart. Give me the strength to say to those people, God loves you too. Watch me and watch my life and watch what happens when I pursue God. Watch God do what he does. These are all great things for us to implement as we take a practical, very practical approach to rising from ruin. And so here's what I want to do practically. I want us to close in prayer. Well, prayer is not practical, it's spiritual. It's both. And I think that we should pray practically, and I think that we should pray spiritually. And so what I'd like you to do is, if there's one of these 5 things, can we put those back on the screen real quick? If there's one of those 5 things that maybe you saw it and you're like, that's the one. That's the one that I'm struggling with. I would encourage you to give that to God in this moment. Say, God, this circumstance is concerning me, and this is a negative contributor to this thing. I need to do a better job at this. And I just want to give you a few moments in silent prayer to give that over to God and to ask God to help you in whatever way this is. Maybe there's 1 or 2 or 3, or maybe it's all of them. I'd encourage you to start small, right? Pick one and say, God, I want to do better at this thing, in this situation that's concerning me, Lord. I want to give this over to you. So we're just going to take a couple of moments of silent prayer so that you can do that. Feel free to take a look at the list as we do, and then I'll close our time in prayer. God, I just want to pray for strengthening of some of the commitments that maybe have been made here in the last few moments. That God, as you've impressed upon us, which of these things that we need to do better at, which of these things we need your help with. God, I pray that we can be people who follow you in these ways, that we can learn from people like Nehemiah. And God, when we do, we're willing to rest. We're willing to share our story. We're willing to call people into our lives to serve alongside of us, Lord. That we're willing to stop and take an objective look around. We're willing to face opposition in your name even. Whatever it is, God, if there are people here who had one of these things or more impressed upon them. God, I pray for your spirit of commitment to enter their lives now and to help them do these things and to do them well. And for all of us, God, I pray that we can all be people who, in pursuit of you, we put your will into action in a way that people can see it, and that we would not be discouraged when people oppose us, but instead we would be encouraged, because we know that sin opposes goodness. So we know, God, when we pursue you, we're pursuing something good. So we know that we're going to face opposition. So we see it and we rejoice. We say, God, I know that that opposition is confidence to me that I'm doing what I should be doing. Remove it from my life, but thank you for your love. So God, go with us this week as we attempt to implement some of these things in our lives. Go with us in our small groups. Thank you for the update of service that Will shared with us earlier. God, give us strength and encouragement to be people who serve the communities that we live and work in. God, serve our families first and out from there. And be with us. God, be with us in everything that we do and bring us back safely next week. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, one last thing. If there was one of these things that stood out to you, I would encourage you to do this. Tell somebody. Tell somebody here. If there's somebody here from your small group and you felt like God was saying, you need to do a better job of getting some rest in your life, grab somebody and say, hey, can you ask me about this? Every couple of weeks, just ask me how I'm doing with this. Accountability is really important for us. And if you don't have somebody in that situation, come and talk to me. And I'll keep you accountable for some of those things. And if you'd like to find an opportunity to be accountable to some other people, then small groups is the way to do that. We've got a new one starting up next Tuesday. It will be here at the church at what time? 5:30. And we have some books. We purchased some books. So if you want to buy a book, that's great. But we had somebody donate some. So you're not going to be behind. It's a women's group that's starting here. It's a book study. You can talk to my mom. Raise your hand real quick. If you're interested in that. And that's a good place to go to be able to find some accountability. Becky and I are talking about starting a small group. We just would need to know who's going to be in it because we haven't heard from people yet. So if you're interested in being part of a small group, come and talk to me. We're also going to do Tuesday nights every other week. With that, tell somebody what God laid on your heart, and we'll plan to see you next week. Have a good week.